Elise Monroe was everything the world admired. Harvard-educated attorney, wife to a powerful heir, and the face of one of Boston's most elite families. Behind the walls of their Beacon Hill brownstone, however, she lived a different truth. Trapped in a marriage controlled by surveillance, psychological manipulation, and the cold grip of a mother-in-law who pulled every string. When Elise discovered that her husband had been conditioned since childhood to obey family commands, she didn't run. She built a case. In silence. For 5 years. Until one night, her birthday, when he slapped her in front of 50 witnesses. But Elise was ready. Her laugh shattered the illusion, and what followed would destroy an empire. What if the most dangerous thing a woman could do was simply stand up and speak? You're watching this from a place where stories matter, where truth and resilience shine. Welcome. This is the story of Elise Monroe. And this is how control ends. Rooftop terrace of Hestia Gardens, Boston Harbor evening. The golden light of dusk bathed the rooftop in warmth, casting long shadows across the marble terrace of Hestia Gardens. Crystal chandeliers floated like suspended stars above the heads of Boston's elite, each guest cloaked in wealth and perfect poise. Elise Monroe stood near the center of it all, her crimson dress gleaming against the muted blue tones Victoria Monroe had so clearly intended to dominate the night. Champagne flutes clinked. Laughter rolled politely from corner to corner. But beneath the glittering facade, Elise's heart beat with the calm, practiced rhythm of a woman who had been preparing for war. Her husband, Nathaniel Monroe, heir to the Monroe financial empire, stood beside her with the stiff elegance of a man whose every movement had been programmed. He hadn't even noticed her defiance, the red dress instead of the blue. His eyes, once warm and teasing in their early years, now held a distant glaze as though something vital had been hollowed out. She watched him glance down at his Rolex again, second nature now, like a dog trained to wait for the next command. Elise turned her head slightly as a staff member approached with a velvet-wrapped box. It wasn't labeled, nor was it from the arranged stack of curated gifts behind the bar. Curious, she accepted it, the weight oddly familiar. She opened it slowly, concealing the contents with her hand. Inside lay a silver USB drive and a folded card. 4 words were scrawled in deliberate ink. "We know what you're doing." Her fingers tensed around the box. She didn't look up, but she didn't need to. She felt the eyes on her, Victoria's, cold and exacting, like a hawk studying prey from above. Elise calmly closed the lid and handed the box to a nearby server with a smile. A warning, subtle but pointed. They were trying to rattle her. Let them try. Moments later, Victoria approached. Her designer heels clicked softly against the tile as she wrapped Elise in a tight, theatrical embrace. The scent of her perfume, sharp, intentional, filled Elise's lungs like smoke. "You look lovely, darling," Victoria cooed, lips brushing her cheek. "But blue would have suited you better. It flatters Nathaniel in photos." Elise met her gaze, letting silence stretch just long enough to draw attention, then replied sweetly, "I thought I'd surprise everyone tonight." Before Victoria could respond, she turned and raised her glass. "To the birthday girl." A voice rang out, William Monroe, Nathaniel's cousin, ever the family's golden fixer. Elise forced a smile as the crowd followed his lead. Glasses lifted. Cheers echoed. Nathaniel stepped closer. "Ready for the gifts?" he asked, his voice too even, too rehearsed. Elise nodded, but before she could move, Victoria leaned in again, this time not to whisper, but to brush a hand across Nathaniel's shoulder. Elise watched it, the subtle pressure on the collarbone, a gesture she'd studied 100 times on surveillance footage. Then came the words. Quiet. Quick. Almost lost in the music. "Remember your duty." Nathaniel's posture stiffened. His jaw locked. His eyes lost what little light remained. Then without hesitation his arm moved. Fast. Controlled. The sound of the slap cracked through the terrace like a whip. Elise stumbled sideways, her cheeks stinging, the world tipping as gasps broke through the crowd. She hit the marble hard, tasting blood. The cold floor pressed into her palms. For a moment silence reigned. No one moved. No one spoke. Her head throbbed, her vision flickered, but then came the laugh. Low at first. A quiet chuckle that rose from her stomach and spilled out between bloodied lips. She didn't stop it. She let it grow. Let it rise and shatter the frozen stillness around her. Nathaniel's face paled. He took a step back. The programmed mask cracked. Around them, phones had already begun recording, cameras aimed like loaded guns. Annalise, still laughing, stood up on shaky feet and reached for a napkin to dab the corner of her mouth. The red smear bloomed like paint on fine linen. Her voice, when it came, was smooth and steady. "Perfect timing, Victoria. You couldn't have scripted it better." The crowd stirred. Eyes darted from face to face. Some were confused, some intrigued, but most were stunned. No one had expected the wife to laugh. No one had anticipated that the woman they thought they knew, elegant, quiet, loyal, had just taken control. As Elise straightened her back, her fingers brushed the clutch at her waist. Inside, her phone had already sent the first wave of files to every agency she had worked with in secret. The moment Victoria activated Nathaniel, Elise had triggered her own contingency. The message was already out. The match had been lit. As the murmurs grew louder, Elise's smile sharpened. She could see the first threads beginning to unravel. But this wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't chaos. This moment had been calculated, constructed, and set in motion long before the slap. Because Elise Monroe had not simply endured the lies. She had documented every one of them. And now, as she stood bleeding in front of Boston's most powerful, they would finally see the woman they underestimated. As Elise stands bleeding but smiling, the story flashes back to how this moment was years in the making. Monroe family, brownstone, Beacon Hill, early morning. It had started with a spreadsheet. That was all. A simple discrepancy in the quarterly reports Nathaniel had asked Elise to skim before a family investment meeting. A name where there should have been a number. A transfer that bypassed conventional paths. Most would have dismissed it as clerical error. Elise had known better. She had built her career on spotting what others missed. The Monroe brownstone on Beacon Hill stood like a monument to restraint and wealth. Inside, however, it was a theater of performance. Every smile choreographed. Every gesture expected. Elise had learned to move through it like a trained actress, her true thoughts buried under rehearsed elegance. Cameras watched from corners, concealed under designer fixtures and framed artwork. Elise had discovered them all. Every lens Victoria had installed for their safety during renovations. Every bug hidden behind panels and molding. What Victoria didn't know was that Elise hadn't disabled them. She'd redirected their feed. What they captured was a loop of routine domesticity, curated to perfection. Her sanctuary was the walk-in closet, converted over time into something more. A fingerprint panel hidden behind the second rack of coats revealed a recessed wall, where she had mounted a waterproof case. Inside, she kept 3 burner phones, encrypted hard drives, flash drives labeled with names and dates. Each piece a stitch in the fabric of the truth she was weaving. She opened the case, checked the status of the auto-upload protocol and refreshed the secure cloud mirror. Everything was intact. One more day. Just one. She had rehearsed this routine to the point of second nature. From the outside, she was still the perfect corporate attorney. Still Mrs. Monroe. Still the glowing wife. She applied her makeup carefully, blending the foundation over the slight bruising from a stress-induced facial twitch she had developed weeks ago. The suit she selected for court was conservative, respectful, and unassuming. She favored such armor in public now. Nathaniel had changed too. She noticed it in the way he moved. The delay in his reactions. The way his pupils contracted unnaturally under certain lights. She had begun recording those moments with one of the burner phones, cataloging triggers and timestamps. The patterns were consistent. Especially after encounters with Victoria or William. It was as if they were syncing him to some unspoken rhythm. 3 weeks ago, Elise's brakes had failed as she left a late-night deposition. The car spun at a downtown intersection, narrowly missing a pedestrian. The mechanic found nothing. But Elise knew better. It had been a warning. A reminder that she was treading in places no one wanted her to go. She hadn't flinched. She had instead installed 2 dash cams and rerouted her location beacon to a private server that broadcast in real time. Victoria's grip wasn't just on Nathaniel. It extended to every corridor of the family business. Elise had traced payments from Monroe shell companies to obscure accounts in the Caymans. One in Zurich. Another in Jakarta. Every dollar accounted for. Every contact backed up. Elise had even located the original documents from the trust, unsigned in a hidden archive box in William's storage unit. That day she realized Victoria had rewritten history to fit her image. The dynasty wasn't just built on money. It thrived on manipulation. The worst came when she stumbled upon a video. A silent clip captured by a hidden camera Elise had planted in Victoria's study. The footage showed a meeting between Victoria and Dr. Henry Whitmore, the so-called childhood therapist. They didn't speak in medical terms. There was no mention of Nathaniel's well-being. Only phrases like reinforcement schedule and response optimization. Elise watched, horrified, as Whitmore referred to Nathaniel as the asset. That was when she understood. Nathaniel hadn't changed by chance. He had been shaped, groomed, engineered. This wasn't marriage. It was captivity in luxury. Elise felt the weight of it every time she sat at the family dinner table, surrounded by smiling faces trained to maintain appearances. And yet she smiled back. Because survival required it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. Wear the navy Prada to dinner. Nathaniel prefers it. Another directive disguised as care. Elise typed a polite acknowledgement but slipped the phone back into her bag without reacting. She had already chosen the crimson dress. Small acts of rebellion. They kept her grounded. That morning as she left for court, she paused by the mirror in the foyer. The reflection showed a woman who was still playing her role. But under the surface, a different Elise waited. She glanced at the time. Less than 12 hours until the dinner party. Until the announcement. Until everything she had built in silence would speak for itself. With only one day left before the trust fund release deadline, Elise prepares for her courtroom appearance while finalizing her evidence. Courtroom and Elise's Uber ride to the party. The courthouse steps were quiet in the early light, gray stone reflecting the dull sky above. Elise adjusted her coat, briefcase in hand, and passed through the metal detectors with the ease of routine. To the outside world, she was Elise Monroe, corporate defense attorney at Kenwick, Sloan & Blake, Boston's most prestigious firm. In heels and St. John wool, she was everything the Monroe name had cultivated. But inside she was counting minutes, not motions. Not for her client but for herself. The Prescott hearing wrapped earlier than expected. Elise's argument was concise and unflinching. The judge praised her clarity. Her client thanked her with shallow applause and nervous small talk. She smiled, nodded, and moved on. Her real work wasn't in the courtroom today. It lay encrypted inside her bag. By noon she had slipped out through a side exit. No press. No photographs. Just Elise stepping into the waiting Uber, her phone already in her lap. She opened the secure messaging app, typing with steady fingers. Case wrapped. Final sync complete. Ready for execution. Her contact at the SEC replied in under a minute. Received. One concern. Possible leak. Be careful tonight. A leak. Elise's stomach turned but her face remained composed. She'd known the risk from the start. The more evidence she compiled, the more vulnerable she became. But there was no turning back. The night ahead wasn't optional. It was the culmination of 5 years of work. One wrong move and she'd disappear beneath the very system she was trying to expose. As the Uber curved along Beacon Street toward the harbor, Elise tapped into her encrypted cloud vault. She ran one final verification. The folder was still intact. Videos. Audio files. Wire transfers. Shell company structures. But one file stood out, just added. A set of photographs time-stamped and geotagged to Victoria's address. They showed Dr. Henry Whitmore, Nathaniel's childhood therapist, entering Victoria's private entrance at dusk the night before. He wasn't carrying a medical bag. He wasn't there for a session. His coat was tailored, his briefcase slim and metallic. Attached was an invoice. $30,000. Monthly retainer. Labeled, consulting services. Elise stared at the images, her throat dry. This was it. The last piece. The proof that everything done to Nathaniel had been structured, paid for, and recorded. Not therapy. Programming. She closed the file, heart hammering in her chest, then lifted her head and stared out the window. Boston's skyline was sharp against the silver sky. In that moment her life divided neatly into before and after. In the beginning she had thought love could outlast power. She remembered the first year of marriage. Nathaniel teasing her about working late, dancing barefoot in their first apartment. He had once been curious, warm, even rebellious. But then Victoria's influence began to show. Subtle at first. then smothering. Elise had watched him retreat inch by inch until there was nothing left but performance. She stopped waiting for him to return and started building her case instead. The Uber slowed at a light. Elise reached for her clutch, opened the second phone and checked the GPS sync with the standby server. A green dot blinked in the corner of the screen. Emergency ready. She toggled the settings to activate her dead man switch. If her phone registered a physical impact exceeding a set force, or if she failed to check in after midnight, the data would upload to law enforcement, media outlets, and 3 specific advocacy organizations. The plan was simple. If they silenced her, the story would speak. The car turned onto the private road leading to Hestia Gardens. The building loomed ahead, glass and steel rising like a polished fortress at the harbor's edge. The sun dipped low now, casting long shadows. Golden hour. Victoria's favorite time for photographs. Elise opened her compact mirror. She reapplied her lipstick. Crimson. Not for glamour but for intent. Her reflection was calm but her pulse surged with focus. The dress clung like armor. The silence before a storm. Her phone vibrated once more. A final message from the SEC contact. Confirmation. Files received. Coordination with FBI in place. All eyes on tonight. She replied only with a dot. Nothing more needed to be said. The Uber came to a halt. The valet opened the door with a courteous nod. Elise stepped out, her heels clicking against the stone. She was ready. She had been ready for years. Elise arrives at the party dressed in red, defying Victoria's order to wear blue, and mentally prepares to trigger her plan. Rooftop birthday celebration, golden hour into sunset. The elevator doors opened with a chime, revealing the rooftop of Hestia Gardens transformed into a stage of opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from nearly invisible wires, glittering like suspended constellations above a perfectly arranged landscape of white orchids, silk linens and silver cutlery. The harbor glowed behind it all, catching the last light of the setting sun. Boston's elite mingled with practiced ease, judges, senators, CEOs and socialites, all curated with precision by Victoria Monroe. Elise stepped forward, her crimson Dior gown drawing eyes instantly. It clashed deliberately with the sea of navy, dove gray and ivory Victoria's color scheme for the evening. The statement was not just visual. It was tactical. A signal. Nathaniel stood beside her, his hand resting mechanically at the small of her back. His suit was impeccable. His eyes were distant. He hadn't spoken much during the drive. Only glanced at his watch over and over like a wind-up doll awaiting release. Mrs. Monroe, the maitre d' greeted, offering a slight bow. Mrs. Victoria has been asking for you. I'm sure she has, Elise replied smoothly. She allowed herself to be guided into the heart of the event. Every table, every guest, every flower placement bore the mark of Victoria's control. Elise could feel it, like invisible strings suspended from every chandelier, drawing people into place. Victoria approached from the far end of the terrace, dressed in midnight blue Chanel, her silver bob glinting under the lights. Her expression was warm but restrained, like a queen tolerating a minor disruption. Her arms opened. Elise, darling, she purred, embracing her with controlled enthusiasm. Her perfume wrapped around Elise like smoke. Red? She added in a whisper. It's bold. I thought it would surprise everyone, Elise said with a soft smile. Victoria's eyes narrowed for half a beat. Then she recovered, looping her arm through Elise's and steering her deeper into the party. Everyone important is here, she announced as if reading a program. We wanted this to be intimate. Elise scanned the crowd. She recognized faces. Judge Holloway, Senator Prescott, 3 university presidents. But not one of her own friends was there. Not her mentor from her first law firm. Not her closest colleague from the office. The guest list had been purified. Sanitized. Anyone who might support Elise had been strategically removed. They passed William Monroe, Victoria's nephew and the family's legal shadow. He greeted Elise with a stiff smile. Champagne birthday girl? I'll pass, she said, watching as his eyes flicked toward the entrance. Following his glance, Elise spotted a man being escorted in. Late 40s, silver hair, tailored charcoal suit. Dr. Henry Whitmore. Elise drifted closer, veiling her path behind a server with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. She caught fragments of the conversation. Timeline needs acceleration, William muttered. The trustees won't extend again. We're pushing him too fast, Whitmore said, barely audible. Instability is a risk. No choice, William replied. Contractual obligations are final. Elise let the information settle. The conditioning of Nathaniel was tied to a deadline, one she was already racing against. When they noticed her approach, both men pivoted, expressions smoothing instantly. Mrs. Monroe, Whitmore said, offering a hand. Happy birthday. You look radiant. Thank you, doctor. I was surprised to see you here. It's been, 15 years? On and off, he replied with a tight smile. The Monroes are practically family. Fortunate for everyone, she said, noting the faint dilation in his pupils. He was nervous. As the hour progressed, Elise moved among the crowd with measured grace. Every guest smiled too perfectly. Every interaction felt rehearsed. It was a pageant of civility, a theater of control. Yet Victoria's eyes were never far. Always tracking her. Always assessing. Nathaniel, meanwhile, glided through the party like a somnambulist, polished, empty. He offered compliments, thanked guests, raised toasts. Twice, Elise caught Whitmore observing him, making notes on his phone. Dinner was called just before sunset. Tables had been arranged with meticulous symmetry. Victoria took her place at the head. Elise sat to Nathaniel's right. Across from her, Dr. Whitmore. His gaze sharp and clinical. Victoria stood, lifting her crystal glass. To my beloved daughter-in-law, she said, commanding silence. Elise has become everything our family values. Loyal, discreet, committed to our legacy. The guests murmured approval. To Elise, she said, raising her glass. May this 35th year be transformative. Transformative. The word sat heavily in the air. As Victoria moved behind Elise's chair, she laid a hand gently on her shoulders. To the room it was maternal. But Elise felt the pressure, the subtle squeeze. Another signal. Such a perfect evening, Victoria murmured. And after dinner, a very special announcement about our family's future. Her grip lingered, then slipped away. As dinner ends, Victoria prepares her special announcement, and Elise readies her final play. Dinner table and gift presentation ceremony. The main course had been cleared, the wine glasses refilled, and the ocean breeze now held a cooler edge as twilight fell over the terrace. A hush settled in, gentle and expectant. Elise could sense it, the tension cloaked beneath pleasantries, the way people leaned in just slightly more, glancing toward the long marble table where a carefully arranged stack of gifts now gleamed under candlelight. This wasn't just a birthday. This was a show. Victoria stood, her crystal flute raised again. Her timing, as always, was impeccable. Before dessert, she announced, we must properly honor our birthday girl. Guests applauded. Elise folded her hands gently in her lap, nodding in gratitude. She could feel the slim recording phone tucked into her clutch, already active, capturing everything. With practice ceremony, the staff wheeled out the gift display. Each box shimmered in branded paper. Tiffany blue, Dior silver, Hermes orange. Victoria reached for the smallest package and handed it directly to Elise. Start with this one, she said, her voice warm and theatrical. Elise accepted it with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She unwrapped it slowly, deliberately. Inside lay a platinum bracelet, studded with diamonds, nestled in white satin. It sparkled like a trophy, weighty and cold. It's beautiful, Elise said, holding it up. Help her put it on, Victoria instructed, nodding to Nathaniel. He obeyed silently, fastening the clasp with practiced fingers. Elise looked down at it. A lovely, glittering shackle. The gift procession continued, each item more expensive than the last. A designer handbag. A weekend at the Monroe's Martha's Vineyard estate. A framed certificate noting a generous donation to the Monroe Foundation in Elise's name. Gifts meant not to celebrate her but to frame her, to reinforce the illusion of a beloved wife being honored, not trapped. Then the lights shifted subtly. Warmer. Focused. Victoria stepped forward again, smiling like a stage performer ready for her finale. And now, she said, her tone softening with false emotion, for our family's very special announcement. She moved closer to Elise and Nathaniel, positioning herself with precision. Her hand rested on Nathaniel's shoulder. index finger and thumb applying subtle pressure to the exact trigger points Elise had documented. Elise didn't move. She only waited. Victoria began. Elise has been such a treasure to our family, she said, her voice honeyed. Supportive, devoted, the perfect partner for Nathaniel during these 5 critical years of his career. 5 years. The phrase echoed like a gunshot in Elise's mind. She leaned in, her lips grazing Nathaniel's ear. Remember your duty, she whispered. Elise watched it unfold in real time. Nathaniel's jaw clenched. His eyes narrowed. The slight tremor in his left hand stilled. Then his voice emerged, flat and unfamiliar. You've betrayed us. Gasps fluttered across the crowd. Elise turned to face him calmly. What do you mean, Nathaniel? His voice remained cold, mechanical. We know about the investigation. The files. Your contact with the SEC. The room fell into silence. Elise could feel the air thicken around her. All eyes were on them. On her. Phones raised. Some guests already filming. Then without another word, Nathaniel's hand moved. It struck her with stunning force. The sound echoed off marble and glass, sharp and brutal. Elise stumbled, catching the edge of the table before falling to the ground. For a moment there was only silence. The sting radiated across her cheek, metallic and hot. Her lips split, blood trickling slowly over her chin. She tasted copper and restraint. But instead of breaking, she did what no one expected. She laughed. It began as a breath. Then a murmur. Then a full, clear laugh that rose from her chest and spilled into the air like smoke in a closed room. The crowd didn't know what to do. They just watched. Frozen. Elise stood slowly, napkin pressed to her lip. Her dress, red already, now bore a bloom of real crimson. She dabbed the blood away and turned to face the room. Perfect timing, Victoria, she said. You couldn't have scripted it better. Confusion crossed Victoria's features only for a second. You should check your phones, Elise continued. You've just witnessed and recorded a textbook demonstration of the Monroe conditioning program. Murmurs turned to rustling. Phones buzzed, lit up with notifications. Alerts. News headlines. Elise's contingency files had launched the moment the impact registered on her device. The timing had been precise. Everything now spiraled outward in real time. I've spent years collecting evidence, Elise said. The financial crimes. The psychological manipulation. And now, this. She lifted her chin. Assault. In public. In front of witnesses. At the exact moment Victoria needed to paint me as unstable. Victoria stepped forward. Nathaniel, help your wife. She's clearly. But Nathaniel didn't move. He was staring at his hand. Horror dawning. Cracks spreading through the carefully built wall of programming. What did I just? He whispered. Elise stood her ground. You were programmed to respond. And now everyone here has seen the result. Elise seizes control of the moment as the Monroe dynasty starts crumbling in real time. Rooftop aftermath under starlight and media flashes. For a moment no one spoke. The only sound was the soft rustle of linen napkins, the nervous shifting of guests who didn't yet know where to look or whether to stay. The marble terrace, once staged like a magazine spread, now felt brittle, cracked under the weight of exposed truth. Elise stood in the center of it, blood still warm on her lip, her voice steady. Across from her, Victoria's composure was beginning to splinter. She scanned the crowd, seeking someone, anyone willing to step in and restore the illusion. But all eyes were on their phones, the truth unraveling line by line in headlines pushed out from the files Elise had preloaded. One by one notifications pinged. Breaking, Monroe family under federal investigation. Psychological manipulation at the core of Monroe dynasty. Federal sources confirm. Whistleblower evidence validated. Victoria turned to William, but he had already taken a step back. His jaw was set, his phone in hand, his expression calculating. He was weighing options. Survival over loyalty. Nathaniel, Victoria called again, her voice sharp now urgent. Tell them it's a misunderstanding. But Nathaniel stood motionless, staring down at his hand. His breathing had turned shallow. His pupils, once so artificially controlled, were wide now, flickering. Something inside him had slipped, fractured. Elise saw it. I hurt you, he whispered, eyes locked on her. I didn't want to. I don't even remember deciding to. You didn't decide, Elise said gently. That's exactly the point. His head lowered, palms pressing into his temples. Whole fragmented. The sessions. The summer retreats. Every time I questioned something, I'd forget. My mother said I was just stressed. That it was normal. But it wasn't. Dr. Whitmore, standing just feet away, was visibly shaken. His clinical detachment had vanished. He began edging backward toward the stairs. Dr. Whitmore, Elise called out, her voice cutting clean through the murmuring crowd. Perhaps you'd like to explain the $30,000 monthly payments for behavioral maintenance? Or better yet, the program named in your files, Project Sentinel. He stopped cold. Elise turned toward the stunned guests, projecting now with the clarity she'd refined in years of courtroom arguments. Project Sentinel was not therapy. It was behavioral modification, designed to produce controlled emotional responses, loyalty, fear, obedience, through a combination of psychological conditioning, chemical regulation, and scripted reinforcement. Murmurs turned into full conversations. Phones captured every word. Victoria's lips pressed into a hard line, but even she could see the current shifting. Power once hers by default was slipping. You have no proof, she hissed. I have the video of you instructing him, Elise replied calmly. I have logs, invoices, emails. Dozens of hours of surveillance from inside your own house. I have receipts from Zurich. Offshore accounts. Shell companies. And now witnesses. Senator Prescott's wife leaned into her husband, whispering urgently. Judge Holloway had turned gray. From the edges of the gathering, guests began quietly stepping back, creating distance. Social survival instinct in motion. Then the elevator chimed. Two men in dark suits stepped out, scanning the crowd with the precision of practiced law enforcement. Elise recognized them immediately. Agent Rivera and Agent DePaul. She had worked with them through encrypted channels for months. Now they were here in person. Rivera approached calmly. Mrs. Victoria Monroe, he said, holding out a folded warrant, we are executing a federal order to seize all electronic devices and documents in your possession, including communication servers and financial records. Victoria reached for the paper, her fingers trembling slightly. This is absurd, she said, scanning the document with a trembling jaw. Do you even know who I am? Rivera didn't blink. That's precisely why we're here, ma'am. All around them, the pristine celebration was collapsing. The servers stood frozen, trays still in hand. Guests began drifting toward the elevator, whispering into phones, slipping away. The powerful had seen enough. They were detaching, recalculating risk. The Queen had fallen out of favor. Elise watched it unfold with no pleasure, only clarity. This was what exposure looked like. Not a bang but a cascade. Not fire but light. She turned back to Nathaniel, who had sunk into a chair, his expression vacant with horror. I didn't know, he said again, this time to no one in particular. I thought I chose this life. I thought it was mine. You were taught to think that, Elise said quietly. But now you know. Agent DePaul stepped beside Whitmore. Doctor, we'd like a word. He didn't resist. Just lowered his head, shoulders slumped. Victoria tried one last time. Nathaniel, she said, her voice cracking, don't let her do this. Don't betray everything we've built. But Nathaniel didn't look at her. He looked at Elise. He looked at his bloodied wife. And for the first time in years he looked like someone waking from a long, forced sleep. Elise watches as Victoria is handcuffed, but realizes the real victory lies beyond this night. Federal Courthouse 6 months later. The steps of the federal courthouse felt colder in April than they had in the dead of winter. The stone walls, once symbols of tradition and power, now carried a different weight. One Elise Monroe could feel in her bones as she climbed them. Inside, reporters whispered in the gallery, their pens poised. Former Monroe associates, once too loyal or afraid to speak, now sat in silent rows, waiting. Some clutched folded court summons. Others simply watched, their eyes fixed on the polished wood doors that would soon swing open. Elise didn't sit in the front row. She took her place at the back of the courtroom, quiet, composed. Her presence was a reminder, not of vengeance but of reckoning. She had no interest in grandstanding. The story was no longer hers alone. It belonged to every victim who had been silenced under the weight of wealth and legacy. The doors opened. Victoria Monroe entered in handcuffs, her prison-issued uniform stark against the sleek lines of the courtroom. Gone were the tailored suits, the pearls, the posture born of generations of breeding. She looked smaller now. Thinner. But her chin remained lifted. Still performing. Still clinging to the illusion of control. Judge Matsuda presided. Judge Holloway, long entangled in Monroe favors, had recused himself under pressure. His own name was under investigation now. That fact alone brought a hush to the room. The fall of Victoria had begun a slow cascade, one Elise had only hoped for, never expected to unfold so publicly. The prosecution's case was methodical. Bank statements. Surveillance clips. Testimony. Elise's files, once secreted away in her hidden closet, now illuminated the courtroom like floodlights. The jury didn't flinch when Dr. Henry Whitmore took the stand. Immunity in exchange for full cooperation. His voice, clinical and restrained, described years of conditioning, specific verbal and physical cues used to alter Nathaniel's behavior, and Victoria's direct instructions to suppress what she called his weaker instincts. Angela Monroe, Nathaniel's estranged cousin, also testified. Disinherited at 19 for rejecting a prearranged marriage, she spoke with a quiet authority that carried through the room. They destroyed people who disobeyed. That was the Monroe way. Her eyes had found Elise in the gallery. The nod between them was small but heavy with meaning. They had both lived inside the machine. They had both broken free. During a recess, Mara Chin, one of the forensic accountants, approached Elise in the hallway. Her expression was tight, controlled, but her words hit like a revelation. "We've traced over $480 million in misappropriated funds," she said. "Your estimates were low." Elise nodded. "What about the trust?" "That's the interesting part," Mara said. The original document, Nathaniel's grandfather's version, had ethical clauses built in. The court is considering reinstating them. The assets may be redirected to restitution. For the first time in weeks, Elise exhaled. Justice wasn't just a verdict. Could be restoration. The money used to manipulate, silence, and control could now be used to heal. By the second week of the trial, former employees came forward. Some had been housekeepers. Others accountants. A few had worked inside the foundation, watching money disappear through gaps they were told not to question. Elise met with many of them outside the courthouse, listening as they pieced together a broader picture. It hadn't just been her. It hadn't just been Nathaniel. The Monroe system had thrived by devouring anything inconvenient. Back in court, the defense faltered. William Monroe had turned state's evidence within days of the arrest. His testimony, laced with legal jargon and cold self-preservation, confirmed nearly every accusation Elise had uncovered. The family's top attorneys began withdrawing one by one. Too toxic. Too exposed. Nathaniel wasn't in court. He was undergoing treatment at a specialized facility, deprogramming, trauma therapy, rebuilding. His legal status was complicated. Technically, he was both a perpetrator and a victim. But that slap, broadcast to the world, had forced a reckoning inside him that no courtroom could duplicate. Elise visited him once a month. They sat in the garden on metal benches surrounded by early spring blooms. His face had thinned. The tailored suits were gone. His hands sometimes trembled when he spoke. "I don't know who I am without her voice in my head," he said once, staring into the distance. "The fact that you're asking," Elise told him, "means you're already further than you think." The foundation Elise created had grown quickly. The Cognitive Liberty Legal Fund, focused on psychological manipulation, coercive control, and financial exploitation, had taken on a dozen cases in just 2 months. Many were modeled after the Monroe playbook. Quiet power. Hidden abuse. Legal camouflage. Legislators had begun reaching out. Psychologists too. There was a hunger for change, for language that addressed what had once been invisible. Elise wasn't just winning justice for herself. She was rewriting the playbook for others. On sentencing day, Nathaniel appears changed. Elise faces one final decision. Courthouse steps, foundation office, final meeting between Elise and Nathaniel. The courtroom had begun to empty by the time Elise stepped outside. The verdict had been delivered just before noon. 28 years in federal prison for Victoria Monroe. Fraud. Racketeering. Conspiracy. The sentencing had taken less than 15 minutes. The evidence had spoken for itself. Victoria hadn't. She had sat through it all with her back rigid, her gaze fixed straight ahead, not once glancing toward Elise. Even as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, she hadn't flinched. But whatever performance she'd once mastered no longer held power. Her empire was rubble. Her name no longer a fortress. Just a cautionary tale. The spring breeze on the courthouse steps smelled faintly of salt and traffic. Elise paused for a moment at the bottom, watching reporters gather near the sidewalk. She didn't approach them. She had no statement to give. Her words had already reshaped laws, opened eyes, and turned silent whispers into public reckoning. Now she needed something else: quiet. The office of the Cognitive Liberty Legal Fund, just blocks from the courthouse, was tucked into the third floor of a red brick building that used to house an art gallery. The walls were still white, the windows wide. The silence inside was different from the silence she'd learned to endure in the Monroe home. This silence meant choice. Peace. Stacks of active cases lined her desk. Women and men from across the country, reaching out after hearing her story. Victims of manipulation, coercive control, high-functioning systems designed to strip autonomy behind a facade of love or loyalty. She reviewed them each night with a mixture of rage and resolve. This work would not end with Victoria. This was the beginning. That afternoon, a knock sounded at her office door. Elise looked up, surprised to see Nathaniel standing there. He was thinner than she remembered. Paler. His clothes simple, gray button-down, slacks, nothing tailored. He stepped in cautiously, as if uncertain whether he belonged in her presence. "The trustees approved the restitution plan," he said without preamble. "Everyone they harmed will be compensated. Including you." "I didn't do this for money," Elise replied. "I know," he said. "That's why I asked them to transfer my personal share to your foundation." The words hung in the air for a beat. "It felt right," he added. "That money was meant to control me. I wanted to free someone else." She nodded, not trusting her voice yet. There was something different about him now. Not just the clothing or the tone, but the way he moved, less certain but more real. As if the script had finally slipped away. "I want to help," he said. "Eventually. When I'm further along. When I can be useful without doing harm." "You will be," Elise replied. They sat quietly for a while, no promises spoken, no easy forgiveness exchanged. Their relationship had been shaped under a lie, sculpted by another's will. But somewhere in that constructed life, something true had existed. It wasn't enough to rebuild from. But it was enough to walk away without bitterness. "I thought I was weak," Nathaniel said at last. "For never questioning it. For becoming what they made me." "You were never weak," Elise said softly. "You were stolen. Piece by piece. But you're putting yourself back together. That takes strength most people never have to find." Outside the window, the city moved on. People walked to appointments. Taxis honked. Life kept going. But inside that room, something had been reclaimed. That night, Elise stood alone in the foundation's new conference room. On the wall was a quote she had chosen from her first client's testimony. "They didn't take my voice. They just convinced me it was useless." She read it again. Slowly. Then turned off the light. 6 months after her birthday had become a battlefield, Elise had built something Victoria never could. A legacy rooted in liberation, not control. She had confronted power not just with evidence but with clarity and compassion. She had turned personal survival into public change. The headlines would fade. The name Monroe would disappear from the charity circuit, the boardrooms, the back pages of society magazines. But something else would remain: an idea. That no one owns your mind. That control can be broken. That freedom begins when you choose your own voice. She was once a puppet. Then a player. Now she writes the rules. True power isn't control. It's choosing your own story. Sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin not with a scream, but with a quiet decision. I won't live like this anymore. Elise Monroe's story is more than just a takedown of a corrupt dynasty. It's a journey of reclaiming autonomy, of standing alone in the ruins and choosing to rebuild. From a wife silenced behind designer curtains to a woman who exposed a legacy of manipulation, her fight wasn't just against a powerful family, it was against a system that told her she had no right to question. And in choosing to speak, she didn't just free herself. She lit a path for others. What about you? Have you ever felt trapped by someone else's version of your life? this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Because stories like Elise's deserve to be heard. And maybe, just maybe, they'll help someone else find their voice too.